Hey everyone, today we're going to discuss the idea of Boredom using the existential theories of the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, and particularly on what he's delineated in his book Either-Or, which some would argue is his magnum opus. Also, sorry about the background noise, someone's mowing their lawn just when I've decided to record a video. But firstly, let me read something from the book. So here, Kierkegaard is writing as the aesthete, and I'll get into what that means in a bit. He says this: people of experience maintain that it is very sensible to start from a principle. I grant them that and start with the principle that all men are boring. For if my principle is true, to slacken or increase one's impetus, one need only consider with more or less moderation how ruinous boredom is for man. And if one wants to risk doing injury to the locomotive itself by pressing the speed to the maximum, one need only say to oneself, boredom is a root of all evil. Strange that boredom, so still and static, should have such power to set things in motion. The effect that boredom exercises is altogether magical, except that it is not one of attraction, but of repulsion. So, firstly, starting off this section of Either-Or, you could see clearly Kierkegaard's aesthete is no fan of boredom. He literally states that we're repelled by it. But it's important to understand this before we get to exploring this idea of boredom via the lens of Kierkegaard, is that this is particularly not what Kierkegaard believes. And that's really important because this, in my opinion, is what makes Kierkegaard a brilliant philosopher. You never really truly know what his beliefs are. He delineates and outlines different kinds of existential theories. And the aesthete, the person who wants to live the aesthetic life, I think is in like a rather uncanny way pertinent to our times. I wouldn't say uncanny is the proper word, but in a rather interesting way pertinent to our times, because I'd postulate that in many ways, aren't we all aesthetes? As in, Kierkegaard's aesthete is a person who constantly pursues happiness and novelty, that they constantly want to be titillated. Isn't that modern society? If you think of society, and to use a term that I heard from, in fact, my mate Ewan, society itself has this meta aim, contemporary society, and that meta aim tends to be happiness. So if you go to a person and ask, why do you work? He'd say, I'm working for money. And then you ask, why do you want to make money? I want to make money to be financially free, or I want to, for starters, most people unfortunately would say, I'm making money just to survive. And that's the harsh, crude reality of the world we live in. People simply want to get by. But at the same time, let's say people that are a bit more well-off, a bit more middle class, a bit more bourgeois. If you keep questioning what the purpose of what they're doing is, at one point, the word happiness comes up. I'm making money to be more happy. I'm making more money so that I can travel the world, experience new things, have novelty. And for Kierkegaard, this is the aesthete. Now, he doesn't place any moral judgment on being an aesthete. It's simply, again, as I kind of touched on before, is a mode of life, an existential mode of life, a state of being. And the aesthete constantly pursues the new thing, be it sex, be it women, be it flirting, be it money, be it alcohol, drugs, or on the other side, what some would call high culture, intellectual work. What I'm doing right now is in some ways an aesthetic act, or beauty and art, or classical music, or indulge oneself in being titillated by such things. Nevertheless, it's still taking real pleasure in the aesthetic life, and that's what the aesthete is. And I think for our times, again, to not to repeat myself, the aesthete's mode of living is germane. But here's where I bring in Žižek. It's not just that we are aesthetes because we spontaneously, deep in our core, in some authentic sense, want to be an aesthete, that this is the kind of the aesthetic life. Rather, in many ways, the moral imperative, the injunction by society is to enjoy, to live your best life. And two ways of thinking about it is the typical kind of the crude 1960s Mad Men style where, it's about sex, drugs, money, women. It's just being the typical consumer, making more money so it can consume more. That's the very crude way that we kind of think of how consumerism, for instance, works. Buy this thing, buy this product, and that'll fulfill you. That'll fulfill your desires. That'll make you happy. And keep going to the next one, kind of like the Jay-Z song. On to the next one, on to the next one, on to the next one, on to the next one. But of course, the other side of the same coin is it's a bit more subtle, but the kind of new age aesthetic life, self-actualization, live your best life. People who obsess over self-help and productivity and mindfulness, and I hate this term because it's really overused. Well-being. You hear Sam Harris types constantly talk about it. It's important to meditate. People obsess over listening to Andrew Huberman's optimizing your health. And then, of course, there's more of the positive psychology, which is like pop positive psychology, focus on being your best self. And then the kind of the new age spiritualist type is divine feminine, divine masculine. I'm one with the universe, which unfortunately, not to get too carried away, has a strain of fascism to it too. But all these things, the kind of crude consumerism and even the new age self-actualization, I put it all under the umbrella of Kierkegaard's aesthetic life. And if you read, the book Either Or, it's a dialectical book. If you read the Either, which is on the aesthete, you'll see so much of what Kierkegaard's writing about in the 1840s, remarkably, applies to our times, specifically our time, or especially our times, given the kind of stage of capitalism we are in right now. And I'm not pointing or like blaming everything on capitalism. In a way, I kind of am, but a lot of our culture, the way we live, it's influenced by the ideological impositions of neoliberal capitalism. I'll leave it there, but it's a bit more complicated. But I'll put it like this, and I think that's the point Žižek makes. He states that the superego imperative is to enjoy.
The traditional notion of psychoanalysis is that because of some inner obstacles, you internalized, identified excessively with paternal or other social prohibitions, you cannot set yourself free to enjoy, pleasure is not accessible for you. It is accessible to you only in pathological forms of feeling guilty and so on. So then the idea is psychoanalysis allows you to suspend, overcome these internalized prohibitions so that it enables you to enjoy. The problem today is that the commandment of the ruling ideology is enjoy in different ways. It can be sexual enjoyment, consumption, commodity enjoyment, up to spiritual enjoyment, realize yourself, whatever. And I think that the problem today is not how to get rid of your inhibitions and to be able to spontaneously enjoy. The problem is how to get rid of this injunction to enjoy.
So it's because of this superego imperative that we have to enjoy. In many ways, we are forced to be aesthetes in the modern world. That we need to understand what Kierkegaard means about the aesthetic life, or particularly for this video, the idea of boredom, and explore it via the aesthetic lens, because again, I am beating on a dead horse here. We in many ways are all aesthetes. In the book, in this part of the book, he continues saying, he says, okay, the kind of the quintessential example is to think of children. We all think of children, and what happens when children are bored? They generally get up to no good. We hear terms of, teenage delinquency, or we see all these statistics, sociological statistics about when kids have nothing to do, they get up to no good. And he says this is a clear indicator that being boredom is repulsive. It's not a good thing. It's in fact the root of all evil, as the aesthete writes, as Kierkegaard. I'm gonna keep saying as Kierkegaard writes because it's kind of confusing to mix them together. It's kind of something fun about reading Kierkegaard because you never really know who he's writing as, because he's got so many synonyms and different ways of explaining existence. And then he goes on by saying that, oh look, the fact that children behave in such way when they're bored is the reason that boredom is a problem. And then he states, what wonder then that the world is regressing, that evil is gaining ground more and more, since boredom is on the increase, and boredom is a root of all evil. And then with the stroke of genius, I would say, Kierkegaard predicts this pathological obsession we all have with being productive, or with wanting to always be busy, which one would say is the ideology of productivism. So I kind of touched on this a bit before. I was talking about people like Andrew Huberman, or all these, the myriad self-help productivity gurus on YouTube. And again, they have a certain place, but what happens is that what people apply to their lives to be more productive, or to try and kind of be a bit more efficient, the part replaces the whole. That's all they become. They all become people who need to optimize everything. And it comes to a point where everything, including things like love and family and intimacy, all these things are viewed through the lens of productivism, ticking off boxes and making the most out of the time you have for a day. And for Kierkegaard, that is he kind of, in a very sardonic way, he mocks it, and he says that is not the way we humans are. We humans, are not machines, and we don't have to constantly live this hyper-productive, optimized life. So he's very sardonic about it. And he says something like this. There are people with an extraordinary gift for transforming everything into a business, whose whole life is business, who fall in love and marry, listen to a joke and admire a work of art with the same zealous sense of affairs which they work in the office. Isn't that so interesting? Because I've recently been seeing on Twitter of people posting these long Google Docs documents, there we go, long Google documents with sort of like checklists on reasons to date me. So even love has become like a kind of like a business interaction, or a business transaction. And then, of course, dating apps. Dating apps is perhaps in our times the quintessential example of how we commodify other people, and we kind of, check the boxes and see our interactions become, again, at a very kind of a transactional level. The same way we go to the supermarket and buy, let's say, I don't know, a can of tuna, and you got all these myriad options. We treat other human beings the same way. But of course, that's not how love works. Love doesn't work where you pick the best from the rest. It's in retrospect, you pick someone and then you make them the best from your own choice. Whole other conversation. But the point being, okay, Kierkegaard sees how once we start living in this certain way where we repel boredom, we repel not making the best use of our time, and we think that's kind of like a sin, because again, our moral injunction, or the superego commandment, is to live your best life. Then everything has to be optimized. We all have to be pathologically obsessed with being productive. And then he continues, and here's where he's being a bit sardonic, which I love. So all people are boring. The word itself indicates the possibility of a subdivision. Boring can describe a person who bores others as well as one who bores himself. Those who bore others are the general plebeians, the mass, the endless strain of humanity in general. Those who bore themselves are the elect, the nobility, and how strange it is that, and I love this line, how strange it is that those who don't bore themselves usually bore others, while those who bore themselves amuse others. The people who do not bore themselves are generally those who are busy in the world, in one way or another. But that is just why they are the most boring, the most insufferable of all. And I thought that was really interesting, because if you think about it, it's kind of like the argument, in fact, I've got the book right here, Marcuse makes in his book, One-Dimensional Man, that when people become these kind of hyper-optimized, productivity robots, they in fact do become very one-dimensional. All their life entails is a life of optimizing one's finances, optimizing one's time, living this very to-do list-based life. And I am guilty as charged. I happen to be one of them. In fact, I would say this is really interesting, because I was with a girl for a while. I was dating a girl for a few months, and probably one reason we broke up was she was the opposite of me. She was very good at relaxing and not doing anything. So I think it certainly is a bit of a personality trait too. Although I don't want to get into psychology and psychologize Kierkegaard's philosophy here. I think it's more of a cultural phenomena where, yes, we all have this desire, this yearning to constantly be productive. And I think the point Kierkegaard makes here is that when all our life is treated like a business, as he's stated here, then we kind of lose this spirit of what it means to be human. We lose this kind of, what's the word? I don't even know. In a way, we stop being human. We become an automaton. And it's even an interesting Marxist critique of modern society. People like that generally tend to be quite boring. I find people who are hyper obsessed with self-help the most boring, artificial people in the world, because it seems that everything in their life is architected, it's contrived, and I find that to be, as he writes, rather boring and insufferable. But saying all that, in the middle of this section, Kierkegaard takes a bit of a turn, and he states this, and afterwards I'll expand on what he means here, which at least my reading of what he's trying to state here. He states, idleness, it is usually said, is a root of all evil. To prevent this evil, one recommends work. However, it is easy to see from the remedy as well as the feared cause that this whole view is of very plebeian extraction. Idleness as such is by no means a root of evil. Quite the contrary, it is a truly divine way of life, so long as one is not bored. Certainly, idleness may lead you to lose your fortune and so on, but of such things the man of noble nature has no fear. What he fears is boredom. The Olympian gods were not bored. They pondered in happy idleness. They prospered in happy idleness. A beauty who neither sews nor spins, nor irons nor reads, nor makes music is happy in her idleness, for she is not bored. So far from idleness being the root of all evil, rather it is the true good. The root of all evil is boredom, and that is what must be kept at bay. Idleness is not evil. Indeed, one can say that any human who lacks appreciation of it proves that he has not raised himself to the level of humanity. So that last line, I kind of was kind of what I was trying to articulate, that in many ways becoming this kind of one-dimensional person, you lose a part of what it means to be human, or you don't raise yourself to the level of humanity, one could add. Okay, so in the paragraph I read, what's Kierkegaard saying? My reading is that, of course, as even Bertrand Russell, who probably comes from a very different tradition, more of the analytical tradition, states, idleness is not a bad thing. Idleness, in fact, is a good thing to be human. We humans need a bit of idle time. As perhaps Nietzsche said, all great ideas come to us when we are walking, in walks. So we need time that is just time spent without it's purposeless time. It's time it's not resting so you could recuperate and do more work. It's rather the subtle art of nothingness, of idleness. And in fact, in modern society, as I've touched on, we simply don't have to be idle. We simply don't have time to be idle anymore, although we are existentially bored. Now, I'll explain what I mean by existentially bored a bit later, because as we read this section, what you'll see is Kierkegaard delineates that boredom is an ontological category. It's intrinsic to being human. We can't get rid of it. We can't jettison it from our existence, and that's the problem. The problem is that since boredom, despite, as he states, or the aesthete states, is the root of all evil, despite that, it still is a part of who we are. We, in a very fundamental sense, are bored. But while we are bored, we don't have time to be idle, which Kierkegaard views, or the aesthete views, as a virtue, that idleness is a good thing. And one would agree, sometimes the most sublime ideas, the most sublime things happen when we are being idle. It could even be a random interaction with a stranger that happens when we are really not getting up to anything and not really rushing to the next thing or the next task. But of course, the problem is, because of our current societal ideology of be productive, be busy, make the best use of your time, and then the other much more, I would say, dark side of things, where people simply don't have time to relax anymore, as they simply have to put food on the table just to get by. People are always working, taking multiple jobs. idleness is going away. It's left our existence while we are also fundamentally bored. There's subtle differences, but they are the same thing. Idleness is something, it's something at a very practical level that we need to incorporate into our lives. Whereas boredom, it is existential. It's constitutive of what it means to be human. In fact, in the book, it's stated quite interestingly, we can trace this, so when he means this, he means boredom, from the very beginning of the world. The gods were bored, so they created man. Adam was bored because he was alone, so Eve was created. From that time, boredom entered the world and grew in exact proportion to the growth of population. Adam was bored alone, then Adam and Eve were bored in union, then Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel were bored en famille, then the population increased, and the peoples were bored en masse. So my reading of that little bit is that the aesthete is saying, despite him despising boredom, despite him finding it repulsive, we can't get rid of it. It's kind of like at least for the aesthete, it's kind of like a predicament, and it's not something we can just choose not to have in our lives. It's a part of being human. And then he states, this is the problem when we don't have time to be idle, which is kind of like a practical thing we incorporate into our lives, but we are still bored, it leads to meaninglessness. And I think that's where it becomes like a social phenomena where people have there's like a mental health crisis. There's a term, a neologism coined by social psychologists called deaths by despair. It's simply people dying from unhappiness. Not simply, it's tragically people dying from unhappiness. And for Kierkegaard, one reason for this would be because we haven't acknowledged the fact that in the core of who we are is in some sense this void of boredom. And it's there. And he puts it beautifully here. He says, boredom rests upon the nothingness that winds its way through existence. Its giddiness, like that which comes from gazing down into an infinite abyss, is infinite. So you could see from that little line there how, thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre were influenced by Kierkegaard, quite interestingly. So we need to be able to acknowledge this boredom being a part of our ontological condition. And then what? And the question is then what? Given the fact that, yes, boredom for the aesthete is evil, and what do we do from there? Kierkegaard, for better or worse, and for my belief is that for better, he is not a self-help author, so he doesn't really write prescriptive texts, except perhaps as more of his religious writing. The fact of the matter is, there really is no remedy or panacea to the fact that boredom to the core is a part of who we are, although one thing that helps in understanding that is that then we acknowledge it, and then we also understand that idleness per se isn't a bad thing. And in fact, we should probably make time and not listen to the societal imperatives or societal injunctions to constantly do something and allow ourselves to be idle. But that doesn't mean any of that is prescriptive, and that's not the purpose of this video either. I don't give advice on this channel. But to kind of end it on a, let's say, a positive note, what is the solution to this dilemma, this predicament we are in? The fact that we are ontologically bored, it's innate to who we are, and that we don't have time to be idle, therefore we have this emptiness and void in the middle of our lives. And what is the solution to compulsive pathological busyness? Now, of course, look, I could give the typical self-help advice or kind of discuss, or take time, have me time in your calendar, lock out me time, meditate, go for walks, partake in self-care things. Those are great. Do all of that. I do most of those things. I exercise, I run. I don't meditate. I hate meditating. But I do engage in these things because they're great. It's important to take care of your health. But for me, still, those are rather superficial things. What I've found personally is that the kind of the remedy to I wouldn't even call it a remedy, not the perfect remedy, but what helps me cope with this existential dread, let's say, or this nothingness, this void of boredom, is to deeply fall in love with the world, to deeply, not to do the whole Western Buddhist thing where you detach yourself from the world and be like, oh, everything's a cosmic phenomenon. No. Attach yourself more to the world, care more about the world, and find something you deeply care about. For me, it happens to be writing, philosophy, politics. These are things that I would go to the ends of my existence, to deeply, to go all the way in some sense. And I think that's the only antidote to this boredom we have in our existence. It's not playing this middle game where you do a bit of everything, but rather finding something that's like an infinite passion that takes you to all the way to the end, to the point where, in fact, when you truly care about it, a certain vocation, let's say, be it a scientist, a political activist, an engineer, an artist, a philosopher, you would sacrifice your own well-being for that cause, for the vocation. If you're building something, if you're writing a book, if you're partaking in some kind of political movement, especially I would say if you're partaking in some kind of political movement, you would sacrifice your well-being, your happiness, which for the estate, would find that repulsive. You would sacrifice all of that for the cause. And I think that is the only way to exist in this world. It's not through taking this kind of middle ground and kind of trying to optimize everything in your life. I think that's a lie sold to us, so that we can in fact be suckers and buy more things off the market. And of course, that for many people, this comes in the form of family. That is certainly something you can commit yourself to. But the point being, I think the worst thing one could do with boredom is to ignore it, repress it, don't look into it, and just, take on many things in life and just drown yourself with tasks or businesses, to use a word Kierkegaard. I don't mean business in like the economic transactional sense, but rather in always doing things and not allow yourself to be idle. My view, one should confront that boredom is a part of who we are. It's constitutive to our existence. And then kind of go all the way, find something that will not just wake you up in the morning, but even keep you up late at night to the point where it's in fact bad for you. And I think that's where passion lies. Passion, for me, much like boredom, passion itself is it's what it means to be human. You will achieve the level of humanity when you truly are passionate about something, and at least that's what I believe. But again, I'm not being prescriptive here. I found that for me, that's the only way to live. It's a life of passion. Thanks for watching. Hope you found that useful. Cheers.